There is a silence that lingers before history begins, a long, unspoken stretch of time that the ancient texts only whisper about. The Sumerians called it the reign of the gods. The Egyptians spoke of it as Zep Tepi, the first time. Yet, buried beneath the official record, there lies a span of 240,000 years that no textbook dares to name. A period when something walked beside early humanity, teaching, building, perhaps even ruling, before vanishing into myth. What if the first civilizations were not the beginning, but the last survivors of something older? Something erased? Stone fragments, impossible alignments, and genetic puzzles suggest that the human story may have restarted more than once, as if civilization itself was being reset by design. Beneath the layers of sediment and ice, traces of a forgotten order seem to persist, a shadow lineage of knowledge that refuses to disappear. Tonight we descend into that silence, into the age before the clock began. The age of lost rulers, buried memories, and truths that could rewrite the origin of humankind. Welcome to Historic Sleep. If you're drawn to stories like these, the ones that live in the shadows between what we see and what was made to disappear, feel free to like and subscribe only if it feels right, and let me know in the comments where are you watching from, and what time is it for you right now. I love seeing our little map of watchers light up around the world. It begins with a list, etched into ancient clay more than 4,000 years ago. The Sumerian King List. At first glance, it appears like any other record of rulers, names rising and falling through time. But then, something breaks the pattern. Before the familiar kings of Uruk, Kish, and Lagash, the list speaks of those who descended from heaven and ruled for impossibly long spans, thousands, even tens of thousands of years. Alulim, it says, reigned for 28,800 years, Alalgar for 36,000. 8 kings ruled for a combined total of 241,200 years before the flood swept over. To a modern mind, it reads like mythology. But the problem is, it's presented as history. The same text that lists real, verifiable kings also insists that there were rulers who reigned for hundreds of millennia. Archaeologists have studied the Weld Blundell Prism, the most complete surviving version of this list, housed now in the Ashmolean Museum at Oxford. The script is crisp, methodical, administrative, a record-keeper's work, not a poet's fantasy. Yet it insists that when kingship descended from heaven, kingship was in Eridu. The flood then swept over, and afterward kingship descended again from heaven. It implies cycles of civilization rising, being erased, and re-emerging under guidance not entirely human. Across cultures, echoes of that pre-flood epoch appear again and again. In Egypt, Zep Tepi, the first time, describes a golden age when gods walked the earth. The Greeks remembered the rule of Kronos, a time before time. The Maya spoke of previous worlds destroyed by water and fire. Even the biblical Genesis hints at an age when the sons of God took daughters of men and begot giants. Different lands, different languages, yet the same underlying memory. A time when human rulers shared power with beings of another order. If we step outside the comfort of linear history, the possibility becomes difficult to ignore. What if human civilization is not a straight line, but a spiral? What if the past 4,000 or 5,000 years are only the most recent arc in a pattern, stretching back hundreds of thousands of years, each cycle ending in catastrophe, each rebirth beginning with a fragment of the old world's knowledge? Modern geology has its own whispers of forgotten ages. The Antarctic ice cores drilled at Vostok Station reveal stable climate data reaching back 420,000 years, 4 complete glacial-interglacial cycles. Within those frozen cylinders are abrupt temperature spikes, followed by long collapses, global resets. Each warming period could have been a window for civilization to rise, only to be swallowed again by ice. Archaeologist Graham Hancock has long argued that evidence of an advanced culture may have been erased by the Younger Dryas impact event around 20,800 years ago. But if the Sumerian record hints at reigns lasting over 240,000 years, could there have been even earlier resets, ones that wiped away not just cities, but memory itself? Consider Eridu, the first city, according to the Sumerians. Excavations there show multiple layers of rebuilding, each separated by centuries. Beneath the oldest temples, archaeologists found strange foundation levels, deep, almost ritualistic, suggesting an awareness of something much older than the city itself. To the ancient scribes, Eridu was founded by gods. To modern scholars, it's merely the earliest known settlement. Yet the ground beneath it might tell another story. That Eridu was not the first, but the last remembrance of something older. A flicker of continuity after an age-long silence. Even in the Sumerian cosmology, the gods themselves were not eternal. Their lineage begins, rises, and fragments, just as human dynasties do. The term Anunnaki, often mistranslated as gods, more accurately means those of royal blood who descended. The verb an means sky or heaven, while ki is earth. The very word implies descent, intersection, a crossing between worlds, and the King List's phrasing, when kingship descended from heaven, suggests a literal transference, as if authority, technology, or consciousness itself was brought down, installed, and then withdrawn. In 1960, Soviet researchers Alexander Shcherbakov and Mikhail Vasin proposed a controversial hypothesis: that the Moon is not a natural satellite, but a manufactured object, an ancient construct placed in orbit by an unknown intelligence. Their spaceship moon theory, while dismissed by mainstream astronomy, raises a curious symmetry. If celestial bodies could be engineered, could the Earth itself have been periodically prepared for cycles of habitation? The Sumerians described the heavens as the domain of the Anunnaki, who measured the Earth with cords and fixed destinies. To them, astronomy and kingship were inseparable. Rulers ruled because they reflected the order of the stars. As strange as it sounds, some of the world's oldest myths seem to preserve technical undertones. The Apkallu, 7 sages sent by the gods to instruct humanity, emerged from the waters after each great flood. Their names correspond to constellations. Their knowledge, they said, came from before the deluge. The Dogon tribe of Mali, thousands of miles from Mesopotamia, possess ancient astronomical lore about Sirius B, a star invisible to the naked eye, but confirmed by modern telescopes. How did they know? When asked, their elders replied simply, "It was given to us by the Nomo, who came from the water." Such parallels provoke discomfort because they suggest continuity where we have been taught to see separation. If humanity's first teachers were beings of unknown origin, then what we call prehistory may not be pre-human, but post-collapse. The memory of that older order could have filtered down through oral traditions, encoded in myth, preserved in stone alignments, in rituals, in inexplicable architectural choices that reappear across continents. Take Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey. Carbon dated to around 11,500 years ago, it predates Stonehenge by 6 millennia and agriculture by 2. The site's megalithic enclosures were intentionally buried under tons of earth at the end of their use. Why would hunter-gatherers, supposedly without complex social structures, carve 40-ton pillars with high-relief animal figures, arrange them in astronomical patterns, and then bury the entire site? The level of craftsmanship implies inherited knowledge. But inherited from where? Perhaps the most unsettling thought is that humanity has amnesia, that we are the survivors of an unremembered age, that our myths of gods, floods, and golden ages are not mere stories, but encrypted reports of real events, compressed into symbols when words failed. The King List may be the closest thing to a time capsule from that vanished order, a reminder of a world where lifespans stretched beyond comprehension, and rulers were measured not by years, but by epochs. Even mainstream researchers occasionally glimpse anomalies that hint at impossible antiquity. In South Africa's Barberton Greenstone Belt, spherical metallic objects, known as Klerksdorp spheres, were found embedded in rock layers dated to over 2.8 billion years old. While their formation is likely natural, their near-perfect symmetry and parallel grooves have puzzled geologists for decades. In India's Lonar crater, created by an ancient impact, isotopic anomalies suggest interaction between meteor material and something artificial, perhaps remnants of an older layer of habitation now completely erased. And then there is the genetic evidence. The sudden emergence of Homo sapiens around 300,000 years ago remains a mystery. The genetic bottleneck discovered by population geneticists indicates that at some point between 100,000 and 200,000 years ago, humanity's numbers dropped to a few thousand breeding pairs, followed by rapid expansion. Was it a natural disaster or a reset event? Some geneticists, like Dr. Michael Hammer at the University of Arizona, have noted traces of unknown archaic DNA in modern genomes, genetic sequences that don't match Neanderthals or Denisovans, a ghost lineage, a hint of hybridization with something we can't identify. If there truly was a reign before recorded history, a 240,000-year-long epoch of forgotten rulers, then its remnants might still echo in our genes, in our myths, in our inexplicable yearnings toward the stars. The pattern repeats: descent, flood, rebirth. The same motif carved in stone, whispered in scripture, woven into lullabies. A cosmic rhythm humanity can sense but no longer understand. And so the question lingers: was history truly written from the beginning? Or was it rewritten after the flood erased everything before it? If kingship descended from heaven, who or what was it that lifted it away? Somewhere, buried under sand, ice, and sea, lies the missing prologue to our story, the one that tells us not where we began, but what we lost. And as the stars turn above, ancient and indifferent, the silence of that lost epoch seems to murmur back, "You were not the first." There is a curious pattern in the ruins of the world, an invisible rhythm connecting stones separated by oceans and millennia. From the ziggurats of Mesopotamia to the pyramids of Mesoamerica, from the buried city of Derinkuyu in Turkey to the megalithic terraces of Peru, a single architectural language seems to echo through the ages. How could cultures with no recorded contact conceive the same sacred geometry, the same alignment to the stars, the same obsession with recreating heaven on earth? Either human imagination follows a hidden blueprint, embedded deep in our collective mind, or there once existed a civilization vast enough to leave its imprint everywhere, long before history began to count. In 1970, archaeologist Charles Hapgood published a work that shook the polite order of academic history. He argued that certain ancient maps, like the Piri race chart and the Orontius Phineus world map, were not the inventions of Renaissance explorers, but copies of much older sources, derived from surveys made when Antarctica was free of ice. His theory of Earth crust displacement, suggesting that the continents themselves could shift positions over geologic time, was ridiculed. But it caught the attention of Albert Einstein, who wrote the foreword to Hapgood's book. Einstein didn't fully endorse it, yet he acknowledged that rapid shifts in the Earth's crust could explain otherwise impossible alignments. If true, it would mean that ancient mapmakers once observed coastlines that had not existed for tens of thousands of years. Those who looked deeper began to see a pattern in the geography of memory. The sacred sites of the ancient world, the Great Pyramid of Giza, Machu Picchu, Easter Island, Angkor Wat, fall upon great circles and geometric harmonics that hint at planetary-scale planning. Engineers have noticed recurring angles of 23.5 degrees, the tilt of Earth's axis, woven into temple orientations, as if ancient architects sought to anchor their monuments to the pulse of the planet itself. Such precision would have required global knowledge, a shared science of navigation, mathematics, and astronomy. Yet, officially, the tools for such calculations would not exist until thousands of years later. How, then, did Bronze Age masons achieve what modern engineers still struggle to replicate? One answer lies in the sky. The ancients watched the heavens as though their survival depended on it. And perhaps it did. The slow wobble of Earth's axis, known as precession, takes nearly 26,000 years to complete a full cycle. To recognize it, a culture must track the rising and setting of stars across many lifetimes. Yet myths from Egypt, India, and the Andes all speak of epochs ruled by constellations, ages of Leo, Taurus, and Aquarius, as if this immense celestial clock were known to them. Could such awareness have been passed down from an earlier epoch, an age when humanity still remembered the sky not as a mystery, but as a map? At the heart of this enigma lies a deeper question. How much of our memory is truly our own? In the ancient Vedas, time is described as a wheel divided into vast cycles called yugas. The current age, Kali Yuga, is one of decline, an era of forgetting. Before it came the Dvapara, the Treta, and the Satya Yuga, stretching back hundreds of thousands of years, when beings of great wisdom supposedly walked among men. Modern scholars interpret these as symbolic moral ages, but the precision of their durations, 432,000, 800 to 64,000, and beyond, corresponds eerily with astronomical constants such as the precessional cycle and even the vibration frequencies of the Earth. It is as though the ancients encoded cosmology into myth, preserving a science that modern civilization would only rediscover through mathematics and physics. Across cultures, the same numbers reappear. The Sumerian King List totals 241,200 years before the flood. The Hindu Yuga system divides time into multiples of 4,320,000 years. The Norse Eddas describe ages lasting 432,000 winters before Ragnarok. Even the builders of Angkor Wat set the length of its causeway at 432 cubits. Coincidence? Or a residue of a lost metrology shared by an older world order? When a number echoes from Mesopotamia to Scandinavia to Cambodia, it begins to feel less like accident and more like memory, something encoded into stone so it would outlast the flood of forgetting. But numbers alone are not the only inheritance. In caves across the world, France, Indonesia, Sulawesi, archaeologists have found paintings over 40,000 years old depicting not only animals, but abstract patterns, star clusters, and celestial events. The Lascaux Cave shows a map of the Pleiades. The Chauvet Cave hints at a comet impact. These were not idle doodles of primitive hunters. They are records, testimonies from ancestors who understood their place beneath the cosmos. And if these people lived closer to the supposed beginning of civilization than to us, perhaps our definition of primitive needs rewriting. Consider Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey. Dated to roughly 9600 BCE, it predates Stonehenge by 6 millennia, yet its pillars are carved with intricate reliefs of animals and celestial symbols. The site was deliberately buried at the end of its use, as if its builders wished to hide it from the next world. Archaeologist Klaus Schmidt called it the Cathedral on the Hill, evidence that organized religion, or something like it, existed long before agriculture. But what if Göbekli Tepe wasn't the beginning of belief, but the remembrance of an earlier one? Its symbols of foxes, cranes, and scorpions mirror constellations as they appeared 12,000 years ago, suggesting a sky map frozen in stone, a memorial to a lost era when heaven and earth still spoke the same language. And there are the ruins beneath the sea. Off the coast of India, near Dwarka, sonar scans have revealed submerged structures aligned to cardinal directions, suggesting an urban plan now buried under meters of silt. In Japan's Yonaguni Monument, terraces and stairways plunge into deep blue silence, carved with precision that hints at human design. Off Cuba's coast, researchers Paulina Zalitsky and Paul Weinsweig reported megalithic formations at depths that would have been dry land over 10,000 years ago. Whether natural or artificial, these sites force an uncomfortable question. How many other cities lie hidden beneath the ocean, swallowed by the rising seas after the last ice melt? If there truly was a flood, as remembered by Sumerians, Hebrews, Chinese, and Mesoamericans alike, then its traces should be found not on mountains, but on the continental shelves. And that is exactly where sonar surveys keep finding them. When Plato wrote of Atlantis, he claimed his story came from the priests of Sais in Egypt, custodians of an older memory. He placed the fall of Atlantis at 9,600 BCE, the very date modern geology marks as the abrupt end of the Younger Dryas freeze. For millennia, scholars called it allegory, but the coincidence is difficult to ignore. Perhaps Atlantis was not a single island, but a name for the last fragments of a world destroyed by ice, fire, and flood. A civilization spanning continents, remembered only through myth and masonry. If such a civilization existed, what became of its knowledge? Some legends say it was carried by survivors who scattered to the ends of the earth. The 7 sages of Sumer, the Shemsu Hor of Egypt, the Viracocha brothers of Andes lore, the culture bringers of Polynesia. Always 7, always arriving after a cataclysm, always teaching language, architecture, and law. Their faces change, but their pattern remains. Could they have been the last emissaries of a forgotten order, ensuring that the spark of knowledge survived the dark ages between worlds? Modern science approaches this with caution, yet cracks keep forming in the official story. Genetic studies reveal sudden bursts of innovation around 50,000 and 12,000 years ago, periods of abrupt climate stability following chaos. It is almost as if each lull in disaster allowed a reawakening, a brief return of memory before the next wave of amnesia. Archaeologists like Graham Hancock, though controversial, argue that civilization did not begin in Sumer, but re-emerged there after a long dormancy. Beneath the sands and seabeds, he suggests, lie the ruins of that earlier world. Buried libraries of stone, waiting for us to listen. There is another possibility, one that unsettles both scientists and dreamers, that what we call civilization is not a single linear ascent, but a recurring phenomenon shaped by the Earth itself. The planet resets, humanity restarts. Each cycle erases most of what came before, leaving behind anomalies that confuse the next iteration. The memory of these cycles survives only as myth. Perhaps this is why nearly every culture tells of golden ages followed by decline, because they are not imagining, they are remembering. As we sift through these fragments, the question becomes not whether an advanced civilization once existed, but how much of it remains within us. The drive to build, to measure the heavens, to seek symmetry in chaos. These impulses feel inherited, as if written into our very DNA. Maybe the gods of ancient texts were not beings from the stars, but the echo of what humanity itself once was, before the flood, before forgetting. If that is true, then the Sumerian King List is less a chronicle of divine rulers than a tombstone for an age of light. Its impossible numbers might encode not lifespans but epochs, the rhythms of a world where time itself moved differently. The kings who ruled before the flood may have been symbols of civilizations, not men, markers of cycles in which humanity rose to godlike knowledge and then vanished beneath the tide of Earth's own transformations. And so the silence deepens. Each ruin, each myth, each forbidden artifact becomes a faint reflection of that earlier reign, the 240,000 years of shadow history that birthed the world we inherited. If our species has lived through more than one dawn, then every discovery we make today is also an act of remembering. The stones may not speak, but they remember, and the earth, patient and cyclical, waits for us to listen again. In every myth that has survived the erosion of millennia, there is one recurring image: a world destroyed, then born anew. The Great Flood is not unique to Sumer or the Bible. It is found in China's legend of Yu the Great taming the waters, in the Aztec story of Nata and Nena, who survived by hiding in a hollow tree, in the Greek myth of Deucalion and Pyrrha repopulating the world after the deluge. Even in the traditions of the Aboriginal Australians and the Zulu tribes of Africa, the memory persists. A flood that wiped the earth clean. What could have burned this story into humanity's collective memory so deeply that it transcended geography, language, and faith? Could it be the echo of a real event, one so cataclysmic it forced our ancestors to start over, leaving behind only fragments of the world that came before? To understand the scope of that memory, we must look not just to myth, but to the planet itself. Around 12,800 years ago, something extraordinary happened. The Earth suddenly plunged into a mini ice age known as the Younger Dryas, a mysterious cooling event that lasted over 1,000 years. Within a generation, global temperatures dropped dramatically, megafauna vanished, and early human settlements collapsed. Then, just as abruptly, the planet warmed again. Scientists have long debated what caused this violent shift. Some blame a massive outburst of meltwater from retreating glaciers. Others point to volcanic activity. But a growing body of evidence supports another, more dramatic possibility: a comet impact. At sites like the Black Mat Layers in North America, geologists have found microscopic diamonds, iridium, and nanospheres, signatures consistent with cosmic impacts. In Greenland, ice core samples reveal spikes in platinum concentrations from the same period. This, some researchers argue, could be the smoking gun of a cometary explosion that rained fire upon the northern hemisphere, igniting wildfires and sending shock waves through global climate systems. If true, the event would have erased much of the world's coastal populations, those living near rivers, deltas, and fertile plains, the very places early civilizations would have flourished. And yet the flood myths describe more than water. They speak of fire from the sky, of thunder that split the mountains, of a sun that vanished for days. These are not poetic embellishments. They sound like eyewitness accounts of impact winters, of tsunamis that followed cosmic debris striking the oceans, of survivors trying to make sense of the unimaginable. For them, the gods were angry. For us, it was nature's reset button. After such devastation, the world's population would have been scattered and broken. Small groups of survivors, those who had fled to high ground or sheltered in mountain caves, would inherit a blank earth. Whatever knowledge had been gathered by the civilizations before them, astronomy, architecture, metallurgy, would fade with each generation, surviving only as myth. But perhaps, just perhaps, not all was lost. In ancient Sumerian tablets, after the flood swept over, kingship descended from heaven once more. Civilization resumed, as if someone or something reintroduced it. The Egyptian texts echo the same pattern. After the flood, the gods returned to teach writing, medicine, and law. In Mesoamerica, the feathered serpent god Quetzalcoatl was said to have come from across the sea, bringing knowledge to rebuild a shattered world. The same motif repeats everywhere. Beings, whether divine, celestial, or human, arriving after disaster to restart the clock of civilization. Could these figures have been the remnants of an earlier high culture, survivors of the pre-flood world carrying their wisdom into a newborn age? The idea may sound romantic, but it explains why the earliest civilizations appear to have sprung up fully formed, with advanced understanding of astronomy, mathematics, and architecture. The Sumerians invented writing seemingly overnight. The Egyptians built in stone with mastery unmatched for millennia. The Indus Valley cities were laid out with modern precision. These were not crude beginnings. They were revivals, restorations of something remembered dimly from before the flood. This raises a haunting question. If knowledge can survive catastrophe, what else might endure? Could memory itself, cultural, genetic, or even geological, carry imprints of worlds lost? There are scientists studying epigenetics who believe that trauma can be inherited through generations, that fear and adaptation leave molecular signatures passed down through DNA. If our bodies remember the struggles of our ancestors, perhaps our myths remember their world. Perhaps the stories of gods and floods are not inventions, but the deep biological memory of survival, encoded in song and symbol. In the mountains of Armenia stands Mount Ararat, where Noah's Ark was said to have rested. Yet the Sumerians wrote of Mount Nisir and the Mesopotamians of Dilmun, where the sun rises. Some researchers, like Andrew Collins, have argued that the Ark myth might point east, toward the region of the Persian Gulf, which was once a vast oasis before it was flooded by rising seas around 8000 BCE. Beneath the waters of that gulf, sonar imaging has revealed ancient riverbeds and possible settlement patterns. Could this be the real cradle of post-flood civilization? A refuge of survivors rebuilding after the cataclysm? Across the world, similar submerged landscapes tell the same story. The Doggerland Plain between Britain and Denmark once connected Europe, home to thriving communities, until it drowned around 6000 BCE. In the Black Sea, marine geologists William Ryan and Walter Pittman discovered a sudden influx of salt water that transformed a freshwater lake into an inland sea, an event some have linked to the biblical flood. These are not myths, they are measurable geological events. Yet their impact on memory, on culture, and on myth is beyond measure. They are the scars of our collective forgetting. Every flood, every deluge, every story of divine retribution might be a distorted recollection of the same recurring truth: that civilization is fragile and the earth is cyclical. When climate turns, when the sea rises, when fire falls from the sky, everything begins again. The question is not whether this happened once, but how many times. And this cyclical vision of history is not foreign to ancient thought. The Mayans believed in successive suns, each world destroyed and replaced by the next. The Hindus spoke of pralaya, the periodic dissolution of the cosmos, followed by renewal. The Greeks called it ekpyrosis, the purging fire that resets creation. Even the Stoic philosophers, the rationalists of their time, accepted that the universe might be eternally reborn through fire and flood. The consistency of this belief across thousands of years and cultures hints that it wasn't born from imagination alone, but from experience. Humanity has seen its own end more than once. If the flood was indeed a real global event, then what of the civilization that came before it, the one that ruled, as the Sumerians wrote, for 240,000 years? Where are its cities, its monuments, its traces? The earth is a restless archive. Over such spans of time, tectonic drift, erosion, and ocean rise could bury any structure beneath miles of sediment. The geological record does not preserve wood or metal. Even stone dissolves under pressure and time. But occasionally the planet leaves hints, anomalies that do not fit our tidy timeline. There are ancient quarries in Egypt showing saw marks that appear machine-cut. There are stones at Pumapunku in Bolivia that fit together with precision suggesting high technology. There are vitrified fort walls in Scotland, rocks melted by heat exceeding 2,000 degrees Celsius. Each is dismissed as coincidence, anomaly, or misunderstood natural process. But to some eyes, they are fingerprints of something older, glimpses of a civilization erased not only by catastrophe, but by time itself. And yet, what if the most compelling evidence is not material at all, but encoded in myth, in language, in the strange correspondences between distant cultures? The serpent, for instance, appears everywhere as a symbol of knowledge, eternity, and rebirth. From the Sumerian Ningishzida to the Egyptian Mehen, from the Mesoamerican Quetzalcoatl to the Hindu Ananta Shesha, the serpent coils around the world tree, representing cycles of time and wisdom from the deep. Could it be a vestige of a single, ancient cosmology, one that predated the flood and was passed down through every surviving culture? If so, then myth itself becomes a technology, an encrypted archive carrying truths across epochs. The ancients could not preserve their libraries in stone. They encoded them in story. Every hero who descends into the underworld, every god who dies and is reborn, every flood that wipes the slate clean, they all tell the same story of loss, remembrance, and renewal. Perhaps that is the true message of the flood, not destruction, but transformation. Each cycle washes away the false, leaving only what is essential, the seed of memory that will sprout again in the next dawn. Humanity is not the first to stand at the edge of the abyss, staring into its own fragility. But we might be the first to understand what that means. And as the oceans rise once more in our own age, as glaciers retreat and storms intensify, we are forced to confront a haunting possibility, that we are living near the end of another cycle. The signs: climate upheaval, lost knowledge rediscovered, a global hunger for ancient wisdom, mirror the myths of the ages before us. It is as if the planet is whispering, reminding us that everything which has been lost will return, and everything that is built will one day fall. When the Sumerians wrote of the flood, they were not merely preserving history. They were leaving a warning. Civilizations rise like tides, and tides always turn. The question that remains, one that echoes across 240,000 years, is whether this time, when the waters come again, humanity will remember what it once forgot. There is a pattern hidden within the stones, a code written in shadow and light, in the silence of geometry. Across the earth, ancient builders seem to share a common obsession, aligning their monuments to the stars. The Great Pyramid of Giza mirrors Orion's belt. The temples of Angkor Wat trace the constellation Draco. The Teotihuacan complex in Mexico aligns with the Pleiades. Even older sites, like Nabta Playa in the Egyptian desert or the stone observatories of Chanquillo in Peru, mark the solstices and equinoxes with uncanny precision. For millennia, humanity has stared at the sky as though searching for something lost, mapping the heavens as if to remember a pattern that once existed on Earth. But why this persistent dialogue between stone and star? Mainstream archaeology explains it as agricultural necessity, the tracking of seasons for harvest and ritual. Yet the precision of these alignments often exceeds practical need. The stars served not merely as calendars, but as mirrors. Many of these structures seem designed to map the heavens onto the ground, creating a reflection of the cosmos, a geoglyph of the universe itself. What were these builders trying to remember or to reawaken by imitating the sky? Perhaps they were preserving the memory of a time when the boundary between heaven and earth was not metaphorical, but real. A time when the gods who ruled for 240,000 years walked among men. The Sumerians called them the Anunnaki. The Egyptians spoke of the Neteru, the Greeks of the Titans. In every mythology, there is an echo of an earlier race, beings who possessed both divine power and human likeness. Were these entities actual visitors, as some have speculated, or symbolic personifications of lost knowledge, astronomers, builders, and sages who carried the flame of a forgotten age through the darkness that followed the flood? The deeper one looks, the more the distinction between myth and memory blurs. Ancient cultures consistently claimed that their knowledge came from elsewhere, from beings who descended from the sky. But perhaps sky did not mean outer space as we imagine it. It could have meant the celestial realm, the domain of the stars and time, the high order of understanding from which civilization itself was born. In that sense, when kingship descended from heaven, It may have signified not aliens arriving in ships, but the reintroduction of cosmic order after chaos, the restoration of knowledge after the flood. In Mesopotamia, temples were designed as mountains, the ziggurats, each a stairway to the heavens. Their tiers symbolized the planets, their summits the dwelling place of gods. Similarly, the Egyptian pyramids were conceived as resurrection machines, portals through which the pharaoh could ascend to the stars and join the company of Osiris in Orion. These were not mere tombs, they were memory devices, stone equations connecting life, death, and rebirth through celestial alignment. The same symbolism appears across continents, as if every ancient culture inherited the same star map and sought to reconstruct it in their own soil. The question, then, is where that map came from. How did people separated by oceans know the same geometry of the heavens, the same rituals of orientation? How did they build with such precision when the wheel, the pulley, and the compass were supposedly unknown? Consider the Great Pyramid. 2.3 million blocks of stone, some weighing over 70 tons, aligned within a fraction of a degree to true north. Its base forms a perfect golden ratio, and its height corresponds to a scale model of Earth's northern hemisphere. It encodes the dimensions of the planet, the speed of light, in meters per second, and the precessional cycle of the equinoxes, all within its structure. Coincidence, say the skeptics. Yet to those who study it without prejudice, it looks less like a tomb and more like an archive, a message carved into eternity. That message may have been written in an age when the sky itself looked different. Astronomers know that Earth's axial tilt and orbital wobble shift the position of the stars over time. Thousands of years ago, the North Star was not Polaris, but Thuban, in Draco. The pyramids and temples that align to certain stars might therefore preserve snapshots of the heavens as they appeared long before their supposed construction dates. The Sphinx, for instance, faces directly east, aligning with the sunrise of the spring equinox around 10,500 BCE, an epoch when the constellation of Leo rose behind it. Could this monument, half lion and half man, be a relic from that very age, a marker of the last great cycle, built by survivors of the world that fell before? If this hypothesis holds, then our planet's ancient monuments are not independent creations but nodes in a vast network, an ancient system of orientation linking Earth to the cosmos, a planetary memory grid. Some researchers have called it the world grid or Black Pyramid Network, theorizing that these sites form an energetic lattice once used to stabilize the planet's electromagnetic balance. Whether that notion is metaphysical or scientific remains debated, but the geometry is real. Lines of longitude and latitude connecting sacred sites across continents in patterns too consistent to ignore. It is possible that what we call myth was once a sophisticated science, expressed through symbols because language itself could not contain its complexity. In this view, the gods were personifications of cosmic principles, and their stories encoded the physics of creation. When Thoth taught writing, when Enki gave knowledge, when Prometheus stole fire from heaven, they were not acts of rebellion, but metaphors for awakening consciousness. These myths remember a time when humanity was not separate from the universe, but aware of its place within it. The philosopher René Guénon once wrote that the primordial tradition lies at the root of all religions, a single source of truth fragmented into the many myths and faiths of later ages. If such a tradition existed, it may have originated in the civilization that reigned before recorded history, the one that fell in the floods and fires, leaving behind only symbols scattered like stars across the earth. Each culture, each priesthood, tried to preserve a fragment of it. Over time, the fragments hardened into dogma, the metaphors into gods, the knowledge into mystery, and so the truth hid itself within religion, waiting for those with eyes to see. Modern science has begun to uncover hints that the ancients may have understood more than we assume. Quantum physicists now speak of vibration, resonance, and frequency as the foundation of reality, concepts that mirror the ancient notion of the word, the creative sound that brings form from chaos. The builders of megaliths like Stonehenge or the Great Pyramid may have used acoustic resonance not only for ritual, but for function. Some claim the chambers amplify specific frequencies tied to Earth's natural vibrations. Was this an accident, or the echo of a lost science of sound and stone? If we look at ancient myths through this lens, they cease to be fantasies and become encoded knowledge. The music of the spheres, described by Pythagoras, the cosmic harmony of the Vedas, the vibration of creation in the Egyptian Memphite theology, all point to an understanding that the universe is not inert, but alive, a vast resonant field. The civilizations before us may have built in harmony with that field, using sacred geometry and proportion not for beauty alone, but for balance. Their temples were tuning forks for the earth. Perhaps this is why the great cataclysms always seem to follow when humanity forgets the balance, when greed and domination replace harmony. The myths speak of divine wrath, but maybe they are natural law. When resonance is lost, the system collapses. Civilization resets, memory dissolves, and the cycle begins anew. It is said that those who built the oldest monuments did so to speak with eternity. Maybe that was not poetic exaggeration. Maybe they were trying to ensure that their message, this warning, this memory, would survive even the fall of worlds. They built with stone because they knew everything else would burn or drown. And now, thousands of years later, their silence still speaks. The geometry remains, the alignments persist, and the myths still whisper of a time when heaven and earth were one. We who walk among their ruins are the descendants of those who forgot. Yet their design endures like a heartbeat beneath the sands, a code waiting for its meaning to be rediscovered. If we could truly decipher it, perhaps we would see that the story of civilization is not about progress but remembrance, that our technologies, our sciences, even our myths are not inventions but reconnections, attempts to recall what we once knew. The flood was not the end of history, but the loss of memory. The monuments are its recovery notes, carved in stone. And so the night sky continues to mirror the earth as it always has. The same stars watched over the lost kings of Sumer, the priests of Egypt, the builders of Teotihuacan, and us. The pattern endures, unbroken. But its meaning, its purpose, remains elusive. Maybe the ancients built their temples not just to honor the gods, but to remind the future that the stars once belonged to us, that we once walked in their light not as strangers, but as kin. What if the reign of 240,000 years was not an era ruled by beings from the heavens, but an age when humanity itself lived in harmony with them? When the sky was not above us, but within us? The stones know the answer. We just have to remember how to listen. When we dig into the past, we expect to find answers. Yet the deeper we go, the more the Earth seems to offer riddles instead. Objects that should not exist, patterns that shouldn't appear, technologies that seem centuries out of place. Archaeologists call them anomalous artifacts. To most, they are errors of context, misdated curiosities. But to those who listen more carefully, they are fragments of a forgotten timeline, tiny ruptures through which an older world still breathes. Each one is a whisper from that long, hidden reign before history began. In 1889, miners in Nampa, Idaho, unearthed a tiny clay figurine from nearly 300 feet below the surface, embedded in Miocene sediment dated to millions of years before humans were thought to exist. The Nampa figure, delicate and human-like, was quickly dismissed as a hoax. Yet similar anomalies persist. Metallic spheres found in 8-billion-year-old rock formations in South Africa, perfectly spherical and etched with fine grooves that seem unnatural. Iron nails embedded in ancient sandstone. Hammerheads fossilized in strata older than Homo sapiens. A petrified wooden block found deep in a coal seam in Austria. Each discovery, viewed in isolation, could be a mistake. But together, they form a pattern that refuses to vanish. Either our understanding of geology and time is incomplete, or these are remnants of something much older, an intelligence that existed long before modern humanity, erased by the turning of the planet's crust and the weight of forgetting. Even within accepted archaeology, strange hints appear. The 400,000-year-old Schöningen spears in Germany reveal craftsmanship and hunting coordination that shouldn't have existed in early humans. The antediluvian city of Jericho shows fortifications and towers dating back to 9000 BCE, millennia before the supposed invention of urban planning. The ruins of Çatalhöyük display advanced social organization, art, and ritual without evidence of hierarchy, suggesting a model of civilization far older than Sumer's. And in South Africa, at sites like Mpumalanga and Kap Sehoop, circular ruins stretch for hundreds of kilometers, some aligned to solstices, suggesting a prehistoric understanding of astronomy on a continental scale. How far back does memory truly go? Could the 240,000-year reign, described by the Sumerians, have been a poetic remembrance of these vanished ages, each ruled by different dynasties of beings, human or otherwise, who rose and fell long before the flood? If so, perhaps our species has inherited not only their bones, but their fears. Every generation builds monuments as if to outlast the next catastrophe, but the earth always reclaims its stories. Even language itself carries echoes of that lost past. The earliest scripts, Sumerian cuneiform, Egyptian hieroglyphs, Chinese oracle bones, all appear abruptly, fully formed, as if imported rather than invented. Linguists have traced thousands of tongues back to theoretical proto-languages, yet at the root of them all, there is silence, a point beyond which nothing can be reconstructed. Words, it seems, remember what we do not. The word for sky, in nearly every language, shares a root with words for God or light. The word for stone often connects to memory. Perhaps the ancients understood what we have forgotten, that the material world and the divine were never separate, that every object was an archive. And then there are the maps. The Piri Reis chart, drawn in 1513, shows Antarctica's coastline free of ice, centuries before it was discovered. The Orontius Phineus map of 1531 depicts rivers and mountains under the Antarctic ice sheet that modern satellite imaging would confirm only recently. Hapgood's theory, That these maps were copied from ancient sources was dismissed. Yet no one has fully explained how such knowledge existed before the invention of modern navigation. If the polar ice has covered those lands for tens of thousands of years, then whoever mapped them must have done so long before the last glacial melt, perhaps during the Lost Age, whose memory only survives in myth. Technology, too, carries traces of impossibility. The Antikythera mechanism, discovered off the coast of Greece, is a mechanical computer built over 2,000 years ago, capable of predicting eclipses and planetary motions. Its gears are cut with microscopic precision, techniques that would not be replicated until the 18th century. In Baghdad, jars resembling primitive batteries date to the Parthian era. The ancient Sanskrit texts, known as the Vaimanika Shastra, describe flying craft powered by mercury and sound. The Chinese Chronicle of Wan Hu tells of a man who strapped rockets to a chair in the 14th century, attempting to reach the heavens. Each of these may be legend, but together they reveal a continuity of imagination that feels more like memory than invention. Modern science has long resisted these ideas, not from lack of curiosity, but because history must have boundaries to remain stable. Without them, everything dissolves into speculation. Yet it is precisely in the gaps, in the anomalies, where truth hides. What if history as we know it is not a straight road, but a spiral? A pattern repeating every few tens of thousands of years, erasing and rewriting itself. There is evidence that humanity nearly vanished multiple times. Genetic bottlenecks around 70,000 years ago suggest population crashes that reduced our ancestors to a few thousand individuals. Some event, perhaps volcanic, perhaps cosmic, forced us to start again. Each restart may have carried fragments of knowledge forward, myths of sky gods, flood survivors, and civilizations lost. Over time, those memories crystallized into religion. The gods became metaphors, the metaphors became law, and the law became history. But even in our modern world, strange coincidences remain. The number 432, which appears in ancient cosmologies from India to Scandinavia, governs the frequency of musical harmony and the precession of the earth. The pyramid's proportions encode pi and phi, constants that define both organic life and cosmic structure. These correspondences suggest that ancient builders worked within a unified system of knowledge, a sacred physics where number, sound, and form were expressions of the same principle. If that knowledge was inherited from an earlier age, then the monuments of stone are not just architecture. They are equations, frozen expressions of a science we no longer understand. What if the flood was not merely a natural disaster, but the deliberate end of a cycle, a cleansing, a forced forgetting? Myth after myth speaks of divine wrath. But what if the gods were not punishing humanity, but protecting it, resetting a civilization that had gone too far, tampering with forces beyond its control? The Mahabharata describes weapons of fire that destroyed cities and turned sand into glass, eerily resembling nuclear imagery. In the Sinai Desert and parts of Libya, patches of vitrified sand stretch for miles. Could these be traces of forgotten wars, or simply coincidences of meteor strikes and ancient fires? Either answer unsettles the comfort of our modern timeline. There is also the question of our own origins. Mainstream anthropology traces Homo sapiens back roughly 200,000 years, yet our sudden leap from primitive tools to symbolic thought remains unexplained. Some geneticists have noted the abrupt insertion of non-coding DNA sequences unique to humans, regions responsible for language, abstract reasoning, and self-awareness. They call it the human accelerated region. Its emergence was instantaneous on an evolutionary scale. Some see divine spark, others natural mutation, but a few wonder if it might be an inheritance, an echo of something older reawakening in our genes, like a memory written in code. If we are descendants of survivors, then what exactly did they survive? Ice, fire, flood, or something even greater, a collapse of consciousness itself? When ancient texts speak of humanity falling from grace or being cast out of Eden, they may be describing not a moral failure, but a loss of awareness, a forgetting of our origin. Perhaps the reign before history wasn't defined by power, but by perception. A time when humanity lived in direct communion with the cosmos, when we could see the threads connecting every atom to every star. The flood, then, was not only physical, it was mental. A deluge of amnesia that drowned memory itself. If that's true, then all civilization since has been a slow remembering. Every temple built, every myth preserved, every equation discovered has been a single drop in the rising tide of recollection. We are not inventing the future. We are reassembling the past. The ruins are not dead. They are neural nodes of the planet's memory, waiting for us to connect them once more. Even now, fragments of that forgotten science surface in modern discovery. Quantum entanglement echoes the ancient belief in cosmic unity. Cymatics, the study of vibration forming patterns in matter, mirrors the sacred geometry of temples. The resonant frequencies of the Great Pyramid correspond to the Earth's Schumann resonance. It's as if the laws of nature and the symbols of myth are slowly merging again, converging toward the same truth that once governed the 240,000-year reign, that everything is connected and nothing is lost. The danger, of course, lies in misremembering. Each cycle of civilization seems doomed to repeat the same mistakes: hubris, separation, control. We build higher towers, brighter fires, forgetting the silence beneath the noise, and each time the earth reminds us, through flood, through ice, through collapse. Perhaps the true secret of the ancient world is not how they built their monuments, but why they built them. To remind the next world that balance is everything. To warn us that when knowledge becomes arrogance, the flood returns. As we stand once again on the threshold of global change, melting ice, rising seas, the hum of technology reaching for the heavens, we are replaying the final verses of an ancient song. The question is not whether history will repeat, but whether memory will survive the repetition. And so we look again at the Sumerian tablets, at their impossible kings and their vanished epochs, and we wonder, were they recording the past or predicting the future? If time moves in circles, then the 240,000-year reign never truly ended. It waits, hidden beneath the noise of progress, for us to remember what we were before we forgot. And perhaps, when we finally do, we will discover that the line between myth and history was never there at all. The more we search the ruins, the more we begin to suspect that what we call history is only the surface of something far deeper, a thin crust covering the tectonic plates of forgotten worlds. Beneath every layer of civilization lies another, and beneath that another still, like geological strata of human memory. We think of time as a river, flowing forward, yet in truth it behaves more like a tide, advancing, receding, erasing, returning. What if our story is not linear but recursive, an eternal recurrence of rise, ruin, and rebirth? The Sumerians' 240,000-year reign may not describe a single unbroken empire, but the full breadth of multiple cycles of civilization, each rising like dawn from the ashes of the one before. When archaeologists dig, they often find cities built atop older ones. In Troy, there are 9 distinct layers of habitation. In Jericho, 23. Beneath Mexico City lies Tenochtitlan. Beneath that, layers of Teotihuacan and even older foundations of unknown builders. Each civilization builds upon the bones of its ancestors, not only literally but spiritually, inheriting their myths, their fears, their dreams. It is as if humanity cannot bear emptiness. We must fill the silence with memory. Consider the pattern of pyramids. They rise in Egypt, Sudan, Mesoamerica, Indonesia, China, even in places where no contact between cultures existed. Their shapes mirror mountains, the first temples of humankind, but they also embody a mathematical perfection, an expression of cosmic order. Why, across continents and epochs, did ancient builders repeat the same form? Because they were imitating something they once saw, something universal. The pyramid is both a tomb and a transmitter, a stairway and a mirror, reaching upward as if to reconnect with a lost celestial order. In the Egyptian texts, the pyramids were built according to the pattern of heaven. The same phrase appears in the Vedas, describing the Vimana palaces of the gods, and again in Mayan inscriptions referring to the reflection of the stars on earth. The builders, separated by oceans and millennia, were following the same instruction. That can only mean 2 things. Either they shared a common ancestral memory, or they were guided by the same source. But who, or what, was that source? The ancients spoke of teachers from the sky, shining ones, watchers, and gods who came in boats of fire. To modern ears, these sound like mythic flourishes or, to some, extraterrestrial visitations. But perhaps these sky beings were not from other planets but from earlier human epochs, remnants of advanced survivors who re-emerged after catastrophe, bearing knowledge that to the newly reborn world seemed divine. There is a strange humility in the earliest records of civilization. The Sumerians, Egyptians, and Mayans all claimed that their wisdom came not from themselves, but from those who came before. They did not view invention as discovery, but as remembrance. The word revelation itself means to unveil what was hidden. Humanity, in this view, is not inventing its way forward, but recovering its own lost legacy. Even our myths of gods reflect this. Enki, the Sumerian Lord of Wisdom, does not create humanity from nothing. He reassembles it from clay and divine essence, reactivating what was dormant. In Greek lore, Prometheus does not create fire. He returns it to mankind, reclaiming what was stolen. In the Egyptian myth of Thoth, writing is not invention, but remembrance of the divine words, once spoken in the first time. Every origin story, when examined closely, is not a beginning at all, but a restoration. And if civilization is indeed cyclical, then the 240,000-year reign may represent the sum of several such restorations, each cycle lasting tens of thousands of years, each culminating in a flood, an ice age, or a fire from the sky. Science has begun to uncover patterns of recurring global cataclysms, the periodic shifts of Earth's magnetic poles, the 11,000-year climate oscillations, even the oscillation of the solar system through the galactic plane. Each of these cycles brings upheaval, magnetic storms, solar radiation, earthquakes, floods. The Earth breathes in epochs, and every time it exhales, civilizations vanish. Yet something persists through these extinctions. Knowledge. Not the surface-level inventions of tools and cities, but a deeper intuition. The awareness that everything is connected, that matter and spirit are reflections of the same field. This truth appears in the Vedic concept of Brahman, in the Hermetic axiom, as above, so below, in the Taoist yin and yang. It is the same wisdom echoed in quantum physics, that observer and observed are inseparable. The ancients knew this, not as theory, but as experience. Perhaps they lived in a consciousness that perceived reality differently, not fragmented, but whole. This may be why their monuments endure. The Great Pyramid, Machu Picchu, Angkor Wat, and the Nazca Lines are not random expressions of labor. They are acts of remembrance. They encode a worldview in which geometry, vibration, and consciousness are one. Modern researchers like Robert Bauval and Graham Hancock have shown that many ancient sites align with star patterns from epochs long before their supposed construction. These alignments were intentional. They were messages, not to the gods, but to the future. They said, "We were here before. You will be here again. Remember." To remember, however, is dangerous. Memory disrupts control. The rewriting of history has always been an act of power. Empires, religions, and nations are built upon the ownership of the past. Whoever defines the beginning defines the meaning. If humanity were to accept that civilization might be hundreds of thousands of years older than we think, that others may have risen, fallen, and risen again, it would dissolve the illusion of permanence. It would remind us that power is temporary, and that forgetting is part of the design. Throughout recorded history, there have been quiet efforts to preserve forbidden knowledge. The Alexandrian Library was only one of many such vaults. Before it burned, its scholars were said to have gathered texts from Babylon, India, and Egypt, records of the pre-flood world. When the fires consumed it, the knowledge did not die. It scattered. Fragments of it resurfaced in the Hermetic writings of Egypt, in the alchemical treatises of medieval Europe, in the mystical Sufi poetry of Persia. Each carried echoes of the same message. The universe is alive, and memory is eternal. We live now in another kind of empire, one of data, science, and digital memory. Yet beneath our algorithms, we still wrestle with the same question. Where did it all begin? Perhaps the real beginning cannot be found in artifacts or dates, but in a state of awareness that once united humanity with the cosmos. The ancients called it the first time. In that era, they claimed, the gods walked the earth, but perhaps gods simply meant humans who remembered. If time truly moves in cycles, then we are approaching another turning. The precession of the equinoxes, the slow rotation of Earth's axis, is nearing completion, 26,000 years since the last Great Reset. Climate change, magnetic anomalies, rising seas, and technological awakening, these may be the signs not of an ending, but of the next remembering. The flood was never punishment. It was the Earth's way of clearing the slate. The question is whether this time we will learn before the tide comes. What if the 240,000-year reign was not an empire of gods, but a golden age of understanding, an epoch when humanity lived in resonance with the planet's rhythms, before consciousness fractured into fear and competition? The end of that reign, the flood, might have been the loss of that unity, the descent into separation. Every myth of the fall, from Eden to Atlantis, tells the same story. Once we were one, and then we forgot. Perhaps this is why the ancients built with stone. They knew memory is fragile, but geometry endures. Each temple, each megalith, is a kind of tuning fork left behind to reawaken that resonance. When we stand inside them, we feel it, not as information but as vibration. The stones hum faintly with the same frequencies that pulse through our bodies, reminding us of a harmony long lost. Modern science calls this resonance the Schumann frequency, the heartbeat of the earth. Ancient builders called it the music of the spheres. The language is different, but the song is the same. It speaks of balance, of the invisible thread connecting mind, matter, and cosmos. If the lost civilizations understood this, they may have used it not to conquer nature, but to live within it, to build cities that healed rather than consumed. We are rediscovering fragments of that wisdom now in sustainable architecture, sound therapy, quantum biology. Slowly, we are remembering. But the danger remains: to repeat the arrogance of the past, to misuse knowledge once more. The ancients warned of this too. In every tradition there is a prophecy. When humanity forgets its origin, destruction follows. When it remembers, the golden age returns. So perhaps the real task of our time is not to build higher towers or faster machines, but to listen to the stones, to the myths, to the silence between facts. For in that silence lies the oldest story ever told, one we have lived again and again. And maybe, just maybe, if we listen long enough, we will hear what those ancient kings heard before the flood swept it all away, the low, eternal hum of a world in perfect resonance, the voice of the earth itself remembering us. Every age believes it stands at the center of time. Every civilization imagines itself the culmination of progress. But what if we are only another layer in the sediment, another pulse in the long breathing of Earth's memory? Beneath our glass towers and networks of light, the ground remembers older lights, ones that burned, flickered, and vanished long before ours began to shine. What if the ruins we marvel at today are not the foundations of our beginnings, but the warnings of our future? To look honestly at the evidence is to realize that the human story has been written, erased, and rewritten many times. There are hints of global connectivity before any known seafaring age. Megaliths on opposite sides of the world share identical construction methods. Polygonal masonry in Peru matches that of Greece and Egypt. The same interlocking stone technique, able to withstand earthquakes without mortar, appears across continents that, officially, had no contact for tens of thousands of years. These builders used the same angles, the same geometrical principles, the same astronomical alignments. It's as though they were following one design, one code. Geologists have found quarries that seem to defy explanation. Stones weighing hundreds of tons cut with machine-like precision, edges so exact that modern lasers can barely replicate them. In Baalbek, Lebanon, the trilithon blocks, each over 1,000 tons, rest perfectly leveled, as if placed by unseen machinery. At Pumapunku in Bolivia, stones of diorite are carved with right angles and drill holes so exact that even diamond-tipped tools struggle to reproduce them. Mainstream archaeology insists these were done with copper chisels and stone hammers. Yet anyone who has seen those monoliths up close knows there is a silence in them that feels like memory. A perfection born not from primitive labor, but from lost mastery. If such mastery once existed, it did not vanish completely. Its echoes appear in myth, art, and architecture. The Gothic cathedrals of medieval Europe, supposedly built by masons who had no contact with Egypt or Sumer, mirror the same sacred ratios found in the pyramids and ziggurats. The music of proportion, governing their arches and stained glass, is the same geometry encoded in ancient temples. Even our modern concept of the architect comes from the Greek architecton, the master builder, a title once given to the gods themselves. Perhaps the Masons were not inventing a new art, but reawakening an older one, passed through secret societies that guarded the remnants of pre-flood wisdom, the geometry of creation itself. The idea of hidden brotherhoods preserving lost knowledge might sound romantic, but it has roots that reach back into recorded history. The priests of Egypt, the Magi of Persia, the Druids of the Celts, the Essenes of Judea, all described themselves as custodians of a teaching too ancient and sacred for the masses. The Gnostics called it gnosis, the knowing beyond knowing. It taught that humanity once walked with the divine, but fell into ignorance, a fall not of sin, but of forgetting. To regain that memory was to awaken, to rise again. Every mystery school, every initiation ritual, every sacred text is a reenactment of that awakening. The initiate descends into darkness, symbolizing the flood, and emerges reborn, remembering. Perhaps this is what the 240,000-year reign truly signifies, not kings ruling over men, but consciousness ruling over matter. A time when knowledge was not hidden because it did not need to be, when the separation between the physical and the spiritual had not yet occurred. When Earth itself was the temple, and every human life a reflection of the cosmic order. But how does such an age vanish? Not through conquest, but through dissonance. The ancients warned that when humanity falls out of harmony with the natural rhythms, when greed and fear replace balance, the world resets. Atlantis fell because its people forgot the sacred geometry and used its powers for domination, says Plato. The Tower of Babel collapsed when humanity tried to storm heaven, say the Hebrews. The Mahabharata speaks of weapons of light that scorched the skies, bringing darkness and ash. In every version, the message is the same. When knowledge becomes power instead of wisdom, destruction follows. Modern science tells a similar story, though in different language. Species thrive when ecosystems are balanced and collapse when equilibrium is lost. Civilizations rise through innovation and fall through overreach. Even stars live and die by cycles of expansion and collapse. Perhaps the laws of the cosmos are moral, after all, not in the human sense of good and evil, but in the sense of resonance and dissonance. Harmony creates, dissonance destroys. If this is true, then the great floods and fires of myth were not divine punishments, but natural responses, cosmic rebalancing events triggered when humanity strayed too far from the song of the earth. The Anunnaki, the Neteru, the gods of every tradition, may not have been external beings enforcing law, but symbols of that balance. When they withdrew to the heavens, it was not because they left, it was because we stopped listening. In the ruins of Egypt, one inscription found in the Temple of Edfu speaks of the Island of the Egg, a sacred homeland destroyed by flood and fire. The survivors, it says, journeyed across the world carrying the sacred words of creation. Those words were not letters but frequencies, sounds, vibrations. The priests of Edfu believed that the universe was spoken into being and that language itself could shape reality. When the flood came, that knowledge was nearly lost. Yet fragments survived in chants, mantras, hymns, and the resonance of stone chambers designed to amplify the voice. When you speak inside the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid, your voice multiplies, forming standing waves that vibrate through your bones. It is as if the stone remembers the song. Sound and vibration are not mystical curiosities. They are the foundation of matter. Modern physics confirms what ancient sages intuited, that everything vibrates. Every atom hums with frequency. The difference between stone and water, between light and flesh, is only vibration. The ancients understood this, and perhaps they learned to manipulate it, not through machines as we know them, but through resonance, geometry, and intention. If so, their technology would have been indistinguishable from magic to later ages. The ability to levitate stones, to heal through sound, to communicate across distances, these feats would appear divine to civilizations that had forgotten the physics behind them. Could this explain the legends of magic and miracles that fill our oldest texts? The Ark of the Covenant, said to emit a powerful vibration that could kill or heal. The Shem stones of Sumer, shining devices carried by the gods. The Vajra of Hindu myth, a weapon of thunder and light. These artifacts, described with awe and fear, may have been remnants of an older science, one capable of shaping the material world through harmonics. If the reign of 240,000 years ended, it may not have been destroyed by ignorance, but by mastery, by the misuse of that power. The fall of Atlantis, the flood of Sumer, the destruction of Zep Tepi in Egypt, all speak of a hubris too great to survive its own brilliance. Perhaps the ancients understood energies we are only beginning to rediscover, and when they lost control, nature rebalanced. The ocean rose, the fire returned, and the earth exhaled. Now, thousands of years later, humanity stands again at the threshold of similar power. We split atoms, weave code, manipulate genetics, and peer into the quantum field. We are rediscovering the same principles under different names. The question is whether we will repeat the same mistake. Knowledge without wisdom, vibration without harmony. It's no coincidence that our most advanced sciences and our oldest myths now speak the same language. Physicists describe reality as fields of resonance. Neuroscientists speak of frequency synchronization in the brain. Ancient texts spoke of aligning with the divine word. Different eras, same idea. The universe is a song, and we are its instruments. The civilizations that survived longest, the ones whose ruins still hum with energy, knew this truth. They built in tune with the earth. We, on the other hand, build in defiance of it. But the ruins endure for a reason. They are not simply relics of pride, but anchors for memory. Each time civilization rises again, they call to us from beneath the dust. Remember balance. Remember the song. Perhaps that is the true meaning of the 240,000-year reign, not a kingdom of gods, but an age of harmony between spirit, sound, and stone. When that harmony was lost, history began, and with it, forgetfulness. Yet even in our modern forgetfulness, we are drawn back to those places. We travel to Giza, to Machu Picchu, to Stonehenge, standing silently among the stones, feeling something we cannot name. That pull is not curiosity. It is recognition. The body remembers what the mind has forgotten. We are children of a world that once sang with the stars, and in the stillness of ruins, we can almost hear the melody again. Perhaps that is why the ancients left their monuments unfinished, not to mark what they completed, but what we must complete. They knew the cycles would return, that humanity would fall and rise again. They built not for their time, but for ours. The flood erased their names, but not their purpose. Their silence is our invitation to listen, to rebuild, and to remember before the tide turns once more. In the end, maybe history itself is the flood, and memory the ark we must keep afloat. Every artifact, every myth, every whisper of a world before ours is a plank in that vessel, and we, who inherit the silence of the stones, are its final builders. The question is whether we will carry it forward or let it sink beneath the next wave. There is an idea that refuses to fade, whispered in the margins of myth and the footnotes of science, that memory is not only held in the mind, but woven into the very fabric of matter. Every atom that has ever existed carries the imprint of its past configurations. Every molecule remembers what it has been. In this sense, the Earth itself is conscious, an ancient recorder of all that has ever happened upon its surface. If so, then the 240,000-year reign before history is not entirely lost. It lingers, encoded in the magnetic stones, in the fossilized vibrations of mountains and seas, waiting for the right kind of listener to translate it. This idea is not entirely mystical. Geologists speak of paleomagnetism, the way certain minerals preserve the direction of Earth's magnetic field at the moment they formed. Seismologists can read the echo of ancient earthquakes in the crust. Even trees remember droughts and storms in their rings. If matter records trauma, could it also record intention? Could the temples and monoliths of the ancient world, aligned so precisely to celestial frequencies, function as memory vaults, storing the vibrations of lost civilizations? Perhaps the real archives of the pre-flood world are not buried in sand, but standing in plain sight, humming softly through stone. The ancient builders seemed to know this. Their monuments were not inert. They were alive, resonating with the heartbeat of the planet. Modern researchers have measured electromagnetic anomalies at sites like Giza, Stonehenge, and Teotihuacan. Some detect faint harmonic frequencies matching the Earth's Schumann resonance, the same 7.83 Hz that synchronizes with human brain waves during deep meditation. The implication is staggering, that these places were designed to tune consciousness itself, to align mind, matter, and cosmos into one continuum. If the ancients built machines of consciousness, then the reign before history might not have been an empire of stone and kings, but of vibration and awareness. A civilization not measured in cities or weapons, but in coherence, a state in which thought, environment, and energy were unified. This might explain why its traces are so hard to find. You cannot excavate a frequency. You cannot carbon date an idea. When that world collapsed, through flood, fire, or simply through forgetfulness, its monuments remained, but their purpose faded, leaving behind puzzles mistaken for tombs. Every civilization since has been an echo of that memory, trying to rebuild what was lost. The Sumerians wrote that knowledge descended from heaven after the flood. The Egyptians called it the reawakening of the gods. The Greeks spoke of the Age of Kronos, when men and gods shared the same breath. These stories may be less about divine beings and more about frequencies of consciousness, states of being once accessible to humanity, before some cosmic shift dulled the signal. What could have caused such a shift? Some researchers point to Earth's magnetic field, which fluctuates over millennia. When the field weakens or reverses, radiation increases, climates change, and mass extinctions often follow. Others suspect solar activity, solar flares, coronal mass ejections, or even the precession of the equinoxes altering the planet's energetic balance. In ancient myth, these phenomena were described as wars of the gods, battles between light and darkness, sun and storm. Yet perhaps they were simply poetic attempts to describe natural cosmic cycles that periodically reset the Earth, and with it, human consciousness. The concept of cyclical cataclysm appears everywhere. The Hopi speak of 4 worlds destroyed by water, fire, and ice, with a 5th world now emerging. The Maya saw the same pattern in their long count calendar, each sun ending in disaster and renewal. The Greeks called it the Great Year. The Hindus called it the Maha Yuga. Each tradition differs in name but agrees on one truth. Humanity rises, forgets, falls, and rises again. The 240,000-year reign could represent the complete cycle of these rises and falls, a cosmic breath measured not in years, but in epochs of memory and amnesia. But here is the unsettling part. If such cycles are real, then we are not merely observers of the pattern, we are inside it. Our own time may not be the culmination of progress, but another turning point in the spiral. The rapid acceleration of technology, the destabilization of climate, the revival of ancient knowledge through modern science, all mirror the symptoms of a civilization approaching its threshold. History may not be repeating. It may be remembering. If consciousness once played a central role in the forgotten age, then our current rediscovery of it through quantum theory, neuroscience, and cosmology is no accident. We are beginning to suspect what the ancients already knew, that reality is participatory. Observers influence outcomes, thought shapes probability, intention alters matter. To the Sumerians, this was the domain of the gods. To the Egyptians, it was Mayat, the balance between chaos and order. To us, it is simply physics catching up with myth. Perhaps the so-called fall of man was the collapse of this awareness, a descent into material separation. The flood was not only a physical event, but a metaphorical one, a drowning of consciousness, a submersion of unity beneath the weight of survival and fear. Afterward, humanity lived in fragments, perceiving itself as apart from the world rather than a part of it. Civilization became externalized. The temple was no longer within, but built in stone. The gods became distant, and history began. To awaken from that long sleep is the hidden work of every age. Mystics, prophets, scientists, and dreamers all chase the same thread, the remembrance of connection. Each discovery that bridges the visible and invisible brings us closer to the lost language of the first world, the language of vibration, geometry, and symbol. We see it resurfacing everywhere, in the study of fractals and sacred ratios, in the healing power of sound frequencies, in the physics of resonance. We see it in the global fascination with megalithic sites, in humanity's instinctive pull toward the stars. Even the digital networks we have built, our web of instant communication, mirror the architecture of consciousness itself, a planetary nervous system awakening again. It is as if we are unconsciously rebuilding what was once lost, a global mind. But with this rediscovery comes danger. Each cycle's destruction, according to ancient texts, was triggered by imbalance, by the misuse of knowledge that outpaced wisdom. The builders of the first world may have unlocked forces they could not control, altering the Earth's resonance or atmosphere. Plato's Atlantis fell, he said, because its people grew corrupt and their divine portion faded. Perhaps that divine portion was not morality but coherence, a loss of vibrational alignment with the planet. Once that harmony broke, nature corrected itself. The flood was not vengeance but equilibrium. Are we approaching the same precipice? Our modern world hums with frequencies the ancients could scarcely imagine. Microwaves, satellites, electromagnetic webs wrapping the planet. We manipulate the atom, the genome, the atmosphere, often without understanding the long-term resonance of our actions. In our pursuit of control, we are vibrating the same dissonance that, in myth, once drowned worlds. And yet, there is hope in the remembering. For the first time in recorded history, science and spirituality are converging. Not as rivals, but as partners. The physicist and the mystic now describe the same universe in different dialects. Both speak of fields, of unity, of light and sound as the foundation of existence. Perhaps this is what the ancients meant by the return of the gods, the return of understanding, of balance between mind and matter. If we listen closely, we can hear it happening. In art, in music, in meditation, in technology itself, the hum of reconnection grows louder. Humanity is relearning how to tune itself to the earth, how to live by rhythm instead of domination. The flood of data we now drown in may be the symbolic counterpart to the ancient flood of water, a deluge of information washing away ignorance, forcing us to evolve or vanish. The 240,000-year reign, then, may not be a myth of ancient kings at all, but a prophecy of memory. It reminds us that civilizations are not measured by the years they endure, but by the consciousness they carry. When that consciousness falls asleep, time erases everything. But when it awakens, even after thousands of centuries, the earth itself will conspire to bring it back. Perhaps that is what is happening now. The ruins rise from the desert, the ice retreats, the myths resurface, and we begin to remember, not as scholars or believers, but as fragments of the same long dream, finding each other again. The past is not behind us. It is beneath us, within us, speaking through stone, through story, through the trembling air. In the end, the hidden rain is not gone. It is humming just below the noise of modern life, waiting for resonance. When we stand in stillness long enough to hear it, when we breathe in rhythm with the planet, the floodwaters of forgetfulness begin to recede. What returns is not empire or technology, but remembrance, the quiet recognition that we are the continuation of something ancient, cyclical, and eternal. And in that realization, the boundary between myth and history dissolves. The forgotten kings rise again, not as rulers but as echoes within us. The part that remembers how to listen to the earth, how to speak the language of light, how to build not for power but for harmony. Perhaps that is the true meaning of the 240,000-year reign, not a time of domination, but of attunement. A civilization whose monuments were not built to last, but to remind. A world that knew, as we are beginning to know again, that memory itself is the foundation of existence, and that what has been forgotten is never truly lost. Every civilization leaves behind a signature. Some inscribe it in stone, others in song, others still in the subtle geometry of their cities. Yet the oldest signatures are invisible, written not on parchment or papyrus, but within the collective human psyche. Myths, dreams, and symbols repeat across cultures as if drawn from the same forgotten source. The serpent that encircles the world, the flood that renews it, the twin guardians who preserve knowledge, the shining beings who descend from the sky, all these appear in every corner of the earth. This shared mythology is not coincidence. It is the residue of memory, an ancient echo that refuses to die. Carl Jung called these repetitions archetypes, patterns of consciousness embedded deep within the human mind. But what if they are more than psychological? What if they are fragments of an older truth, inherited not metaphorically, but literally, encoded in our DNA, carried forward from a time when humanity saw and experienced reality in ways now forgotten? The Anunnaki, the Neteru, the Devas, the Shining Ones. These may not have been gods in the supernatural sense, but ancestors of immense knowledge who left their imprint on our species. Over thousands of generations, their stories became myth, their science became religion, and their legacy became our subconscious. The Sumerian King List, with its 240,000-year span, reads like a dream half-remembered, a sequence of rulers whose reigns stretch beyond comprehension. Perhaps those numbers were not meant to be literal. Perhaps they mark epochs of consciousness, eras when humanity lived in a higher resonance with nature and the cosmos. Each king may represent an age, each flood a forgetting. The list is not history, but the rhythm of remembering and amnesia written as genealogy. The kings are not individuals. They are frequencies. In that light, the Great Flood becomes less a single event and more a recurring wave, a psychological reset, a cleansing of collective memory. The world ends not because the earth rebels, but because humanity forgets how to remain in harmony with it. Every myth of downfall, from Atlantis to the Garden of Eden, speaks of the same pattern: the separation from unity, the descent into duality. Once we lived in synchrony with the forces that sustain life. Now we live against them, and the cycle of destruction begins anew. Even the architecture of our consciousness reflects this. Ancient sites across the globe were constructed not only as observatories of the sky, but as instruments of initiation. The labyrinth of Knossos, the tunnels of Giza, the corridors of Chavin de Huantar, all were designed to guide the initiate through darkness, confusion, and resonance until they emerged transformed. These were not merely temples. They were machines of memory, devices that retuned the human mind to cosmic frequency. When the initiate emerged into the sunlight, reborn, they carried the echo of the first time, a remembrance of the 240,000-year reign when heaven and earth were one. But over the millennia, as each cycle closed, that knowledge fractured. The priesthoods that once served as caretakers of cosmic law became gatekeepers of power. The geometry that once aligned with the stars turned into monuments of ego. The spoken mantras that once resonated with planetary frequencies hardened into ritual and dogma. Slowly, the vibration of memory dimmed, replaced by belief, hierarchy, and control. The gods became jealous, the cosmos became distant, and the living earth fell silent beneath the weight of words. Still, the silence was not absolute. In hidden schools and secret lineages, fragments of the old science survived. The Pythagoreans preserved the harmony of numbers. The Hermeticists remembered as above, so below. The Taoists mapped the flow of Chai, the breath of the world. Alchemists sought the philosopher's stone, not to make gold, but to restore unity between spirit and matter. Their symbols, drawn on parchment and whispered in code, were not superstition. They were the last flickers of a memory stretching back beyond recorded time. In the Middle Ages, amid the ashes of lost libraries, new myths were born, tales of hidden realms beneath the earth, of immortal watchers guiding humanity in secret. The Rosicrucians, the Templars, the Sufis, all claimed to guard ancient wisdom older than civilization itself. Perhaps they did. Perhaps their rituals and symbols were not inventions, but inheritances, distorted yet genuine, carried across the flood of history like seeds waiting for spring. The great work they pursued may have been nothing less than the restoration of that forgotten harmony, the return to the golden age that the Sumerians placed at the dawn of human time. What if this work is not a task for mystics alone, but the destiny of our species? What if evolution itself is not random mutation, but a process of remembering, a gradual reactivation of dormant potentials written into our very cells? Recent research in genetics and epigenetics hints at such a possibility, that experience and adaptation can alter not only behavior but heredity, that memory, in some form, is biological. The genes of modern humans carry traces of extinct ancestors, mysterious insertions whose origins remain unexplained. Some call them ghost genes. Others see them as evidence of ancient interventions. Either way, they testify that we are more than we remember. The ancients said as much. The Egyptian Book of the Dead describes the human as a spark of the divine flame trapped in matter. The Upanishads declare, "Thou art that," the microcosm of the macrocosm. The Gnostic texts speak of the soul as a fallen star, yearning to return to its origin. These are not metaphors of faith, but statements of physics, that consciousness is energy, and energy never dies. It only transforms. The 240,000-year reign, then, was not a rule of flesh and throne, but of awareness, a time when humanity still remembered its luminous nature. The fall was not expulsion from paradise, but descent into density, into forgetting. And yet, every descent carries the seed of ascent. The cycles turn not as circles, but as spirals, rising with each revolution. The flood wipes the slate clean, but memory, like light, refracts through the darkness. The survivors, those who carry the song of the past, begin again, building new worlds upon the bones of the old. In every myth, after the waters recede, the gods return, not as rulers but as teachers, whispering the same truth: balance, harmony, remembrance. Perhaps this is happening now. For the first time in millennia, the human species has global awareness. Our technology has woven us into a planetary web. We can map genomes, simulate stars, and peer into the fabric of space-time. Yet beneath this intellect lies a deep unease, a sense that something vital is missing. We have knowledge, but not wisdom, power, but not purpose. It is the same imbalance that doomed Atlantis, the same dissonance that invited the flood. The earth trembles, the climate shifts, the magnetic poles wander. The symptoms of forgetting return. But maybe this time can be different. The ancients left us markers not only of warning but of guidance. Their myths are not predictions of doom, but instructions for renewal. The flood does not have to destroy, it can also cleanse. The fall does not have to be permanent, it can be a doorway. We are, perhaps, standing at the hinge of another great cycle, the point where the spiral turns upward again. The memory of the 240,000-year reign stirs not as nostalgia, but as intuition, a quiet certainty that we have been here before and that we can choose differently. To choose differently, we must first remember, not with the mind, but with the whole being. To remember that we are part of a continuum older than the stars we see. To remember that the earth is not a resource, but a living archive. To remember that history is not a straight line, but a song, repeating in themes until harmony is restored. The ancients called this act anamnesis, the recovery of divine memory. In that remembrance lies liberation from the flood of amnesia. Perhaps this is the true task of the present age, to bridge science and spirit, logic and myth, to reunite the halves of knowledge torn apart by the deluge. To see that the Anunnaki and the astronomer, the shaman and the physicist, were all speaking of the same truth in different tongues, that the universe is alive, conscious, and cyclic, and that humanity's destiny is to awaken within it. If we can do that, then the 240,000-year reign was not in vain. It was preparation, a seed of potential buried beneath epochs of forgetting, waiting for this moment. For every cycle ends as it began, in silence. And in that silence, something ancient stirs. The memory of the first builders, the hum of the first song, the whisper of the world before the flood. It is faint now, drowned beneath the static of modern life, but it is there. Inside every heartbeat, every vibration, every breath drawn in awe beneath the stars. The earth remembers us. The question is, will we remember it before the tide returns? There is a strange quiet that comes when we realize that the story of the world may be far older than the story we've been told. It's not the silence of absence, but of depth, the hush that lives beneath mountains, beneath oceans, beneath the surface of time itself. The further we descend into that silence, the more we begin to feel that history is not just something that happened, but something that keeps happening, looping through patterns of creation, destruction, and rediscovery. And within that endless rhythm, the 240,000-year reign begins to look less like an anomaly and more like the pulse of a forgotten truth. The ancients spoke of time not as a line, but as a wheel. The Sanskrit word kalachakra, the wheel of time, describes existence as a rotation through vast cosmic ages, golden, silver, bronze, and iron. The Mayans counted their suns in cycles of death and renewal. The Stoics saw the universe burning itself to ash only to rise again from the cinders, eternally reborn. Perhaps they all intuited what we have only recently begun to glimpse, that evolution itself is cyclical, that knowledge waxes and wanes like the moon, that memory and forgetting are the tides that move consciousness forward. If this is true, then the hidden reign before history was not lost by accident. It was absorbed, its wisdom scattered into the bones of the earth, waiting to be rediscovered in the right age. Each ruin, each myth, each anomalous artifact is a spark from that buried fire, drawn back to the surface as if the planet itself is remembering. The pyramids, the ziggurats, the temples of Angkor and Tiahuanaco, they are not random expressions of ambition, but nodes in a larger pattern, like neurons in the brain of a sleeping god. When humanity's awareness rises to a certain frequency, these sites awaken, triggering waves of curiosity, synchronicity, and recognition. The cycle turns again, and the ancient memory stirs. But the memory does not return whole. It comes in fragments, dreams, intuitions, obsessions with lost continents, a collective fascination with ruins and stars. Our myths of alien visitors and ancient gods may not be fantasies, but projections of that inner remembering. The Anunnaki, the Watchers, the Builders, perhaps they are not external beings at all, but archetypes re-emerging from the deep unconscious of a species trying to recall itself. Every civilization, upon reaching a certain stage of technological maturity, begins to look upward to search for its origin among the stars. Perhaps that longing is not for the stars themselves, but for the awareness that once saw no distinction between heaven and earth. If the 240,000-year reign was indeed a time of unity between mind and matter, between humanity and cosmos, then our own age is its reflection in reverse. We live in the era of fragmentation. The earth is divided by borders, the sciences divided by disciplines, the self divided by distraction. Yet the pattern of history suggests that fragmentation is always followed by synthesis. When the world grows too divided, it seeks to remember its whole. The flood of disconnection inevitably gives rise to the arc of remembrance. And perhaps, right now, that arc is not a vessel of wood, but of awareness, a planetary shift in perception already underway. Clues to this awakening lie hidden even in modern science. Quantum entanglement reveals that particles separated by vast distances remain mysteriously connected. Biologists find that trees communicate through subterranean networks, sharing nutrients and warnings like neurons in a global brain. Physicists studying cosmic background radiation speak of resonance, symmetry, and information as the building blocks of reality. All of these discoveries echo the ancient truths once whispered in temples and stone circles, that everything vibrates, that all things are one, that consciousness is the medium through which the universe knows itself. It may be that the lost civilizations of the past did not fall because they lacked technology, but because they misused consciousness. They forgot that the outer world is a mirror of the inner one, that to wound the earth is to wound oneself. Their monuments, which now lie half-buried under dust and jungle, were built not merely as shrines but as reminders, symbols to hold their wisdom steady through the flood of forgetting. The geometry of the Great Pyramid, the layout of Angkor Wat, the mandalas of Tibet, all these encode the same instruction. Remember balance, remember proportion, remember the rhythm of the stars. We stand now in a similar position. Our tools are different, but our challenge is the same. We have mapped the genome, digitized the planet, and learned to speak across the void of space. Yet the old imbalance remains. The earth trembles beneath our ambition. The ice melts, the forests fade. Technology grows faster than understanding. In every myth, this is the moment before the flood, the point where humanity must choose whether to remember or to forget once more. But there are signs that we are beginning to remember. The boundaries between science and spirit blur. The sacred geometry of the ancients reappears in the equations of quantum mechanics. The wisdom of indigenous traditions is finally being heard again. Even our digital world, for all its noise, has created something unprecedented. A global mind, capable of instantaneous communication. It may be chaotic now, but chaos is the precursor to order. Out of this turbulence, something ancient is trying to reawaken. Some researchers have speculated that humanity's cycles of rise and fall might correspond not only to geological rhythms, but to cosmic ones. Our solar system oscillates through the galactic plane every 26,000 years, exposing Earth to regions of higher radiation and gravitational flux. Each passage could disrupt climate, magnetic fields, and consciousness itself. The ancients may have known this, encoding it in their calendars and myths. The great year of precession is not merely an astronomical curiosity. It may be the heartbeat of the cosmos, the metronome of civilization's rise and fall. If the 240,000-year reign represents 9 such cycles, then humanity has been reborn 9 times, each time forgetting, each time remembering anew. If that is so, then we are not the descendants of primitive ancestors, but the survivors of ourselves. The flood stories, the myths of destruction, are not warnings of punishment. They are reminders of recurrence. Every collapse is also an initiation. Every end is a test of memory. What survives the flood is not the cities, not the monuments, but the pattern, the seed of wisdom that remembers how to build again. Perhaps that seed is carried not in libraries, but in consciousness itself, dormant yet indestructible. There are whispers of this idea even in modern psychology. Jung's collective unconscious describes a shared psychic inheritance, a repository of symbols and memories common to all humans. But what if this is not confined to our species? What if consciousness itself is continuous across time, each age, each civilization adding its layer to an evolving planetary mind? In that case, the ruins of the past are not dead. They are synapses in Earth's memory. When we explore them, we are not uncovering history. We are activating it. The ancients might have understood this more intimately than we do. Their rituals of initiation, their pilgrimages to sacred sites, were not acts of nostalgia, but of synchronization, reconnecting the human mind to the greater field of memory. Every temple was a neural node, every ritual a synaptic spark. The purpose of civilization was not progress, but coherence, to keep humanity aligned with the cosmic rhythm. When that rhythm broke, the flood came. Now, in this age of noise, that rhythm is faint but not gone. The same frequencies that once tuned temples now pulse through our technologies: radio waves, Wi-Fi, digital communication. We are once again weaving a global network of connection, though we have forgotten the sacredness of the act. Perhaps the Internet, for all its flaws, is the unconscious attempt of our species to rebuild the lost web of resonance that once united the world. The network is our new temple. The data stream is our new river. And within it, buried under noise, the same question hums: will we use connection to awaken or to destroy? If history teaches anything, it is that forgetting always leads to collapse. The civilizations of the past did not fall because of natural disasters alone, but because they lost balance. Technologically advanced, spiritually empty. We are closer to them than we imagine. And yet, unlike them, we have the benefit of their ruins, their warnings, their encoded wisdom. We can still remember, if we choose to. The 240,000-year reign, seen in this light, is not a lost kingdom but a mirror, a reflection of what humanity can become when it lives in harmony with its own nature and the Earth's. It is not something that ended long ago, but something that continues beneath the surface of time, waiting for each generation to rediscover it in their own way. It is the golden thread running through all myths, all art, all longing. Perhaps that is the true secret of history. It is not a record of what was, but a rehearsal of what will be. Every time we gaze upon a ruin, every time we tell a myth, every time we look at the stars and wonder where we came from, we participate in the remembering. The cycle turns, and the past breathes through us again. When the ancients carved into stone the names of kings who ruled before the flood, they were not recording a literal chronology. They were whispering across time. Do not forget. And if the earth is indeed alive, as they believed, then she too remembers. She carries our stories in her layers, our songs in her winds, our mistakes in her scars. The flood that once swept away the world may return, but so will the memory of what was lost. Because memory, like water, always finds its way home. There is a certain calm that comes at the edge of understanding, a stillness that feels older than time itself. It is the silence after the flood, when the waters withdraw and the first shapes of the world begin to emerge again. You can almost imagine the survivors of the last cataclysm standing on new shores, staring at the horizon, haunted by what they've lost, yet unable to put it into words. Perhaps that is where history truly begins, not with invention or conquest, but with remembering. Every civilization that rose after the deluge carried the same inheritance, fragments of a memory too vast to comprehend. And in every monument they built, in every myth they whispered, they tried to rebuild what had been erased. If we trace the threads of that memory through the labyrinth of time, we find they always lead to the same pattern: the stars. No matter the continent or the language, humanity has always looked upward to understand downward. The constellations were the first stories, the first maps, the first calendars. The Egyptians aligned their pyramids to Orion. The Sumerians charted the path of Nibiru and the 7 gods of destiny. The Chinese mapped the celestial dragon winding through the heavens. Across oceans, the Maya recorded the cycles of Venus, while the Aboriginal Australians sang the positions of constellations across the desert night. These were not separate traditions. They were reflections of one cosmic memory, the same story retold in countless skies. But somewhere along the long descent into modernity, the stars ceased to be teachers. They became objects of study, distant and mute. The heavens turned cold, mechanical, stripped of myth. We built telescopes instead of temples, equations instead of rituals. Yet even as we reached beyond the atmosphere, planting flags on the moon and sending probes into interstellar space, the same question remained. What are we looking for? The answer has always been the same. It is not the stars themselves, but the memory they hold. The memory of when we once belonged to them. The ancients said that knowledge descended from heaven. They did not mean that literally. They meant that wisdom comes when awareness expands, when humanity rises above the noise of survival and remembers its place in the order of things. The 240,000-year reign described in Sumerian myth may have been just such an age, an epoch when consciousness was not trapped in isolation, but resonant with the cosmos. In that world, to look at a star was to see one's own reflection. The gods of that age were not beings ruling over humanity, but aspects of humanity itself. Awakened, radiant, aware. When the flood came, whether of water, ice, or ignorance, it was not only the world that drowned, but that state of being. The survivors inherited the ruins, but not the remembrance. They rebuilt, generation by generation, constructing towers to reach the heavens they once embodied. Every temple, every civilization since has been a stairway back to that lost awareness. The pyramids, the ziggurats, the megaliths, these were attempts to recreate the original axis between heaven and earth. But the farther history advanced, the more we forgot what those structures truly meant. The stairways became symbols of power, the gods became kings, the rituals became politics, the song of the stars fell silent beneath the noise of ambition. and yet silence has its purpose. Just as the earth must sleep to renew itself, so too must memory pass through darkness. Every flood, every fall, every extinction is part of that long breath between awakenings. Even now, in our modern world of glass and code, we stand once more at the edge of remembering. The floodwaters of data are rising, carrying both chaos and revelation, and within that torrent, ancient patterns resurface. Consider how our technologies mimic the structure of myth. The Internet, a global web connecting billions, resembles the Indra's net of the Vedas, in which every jewel reflects all others. Artificial intelligence mirrors the golem of Jewish legend and the living statues of Hephaestus, creations animated by human thought. The satellites encircling our planet form a new constellation, a digital zodiac watching from above. It is as if we are unconsciously reenacting the myths of creation, reweaving the lost network of awareness through machines. We are not inventing, we are remembering, translating metaphysics into circuitry. But remembrance is not enough. Knowledge without wisdom is the cause of every flood. The civilizations that ruled before the deluge may have wielded powers beyond our comprehension, energies harnessed from sound, vibration, or crystal resonance. Yet power, divorced from reverence, always collapses upon itself. The myths of Atlantis, Lemuria, and countless others warn of the same mistake. The attempt to control what should only be harmonized, the balance between human will and cosmic law, is delicate. When it breaks, the world resets. So what happens if this cycle is nearing its next turn? Climate systems are shifting, magnetic poles are wandering, and ancient ice is melting to reveal secrets long buried. The very forces that erased the last world seem to stir again. Yet, alongside this, humanity's collective consciousness expands. People across cultures are awakening to the same realization that our ancestors once knew, that the earth is alive, that time is cyclical, that memory is sacred. Science calls it systems theory. Spirituality calls it awakening. But beneath the language lies the same truth. The age of separation is ending. The Sumerians wrote that kingship descended from heaven after the flood, as if civilization were a gift returned. Perhaps that is what awaits us now, not in the form of a ruler, but of an understanding. A new descent of knowledge, rising not from the sky, but from within the earth itself, from the resonance of the old sites, from the frequencies encoded in the stones, from the deep magnetic pulse of the planet awakening once more. We are not waiting for the gods to return. We are becoming what they always represented, the fusion of earth and sky, matter and spirit, memory and creation. To reach that state again requires something deceptively simple: remembering how to listen. Listening not just with ears, but with presence, with the same awareness the ancient builders must have had when they aligned stones to the stars. The ruins, the myths, the numbers, they are not puzzles to solve, but songs to hear. They hum at the edge of consciousness, waiting for resonance. When we stop treating them as curiosities and start feeling them as memories, the pattern becomes clear. The 240,000-year reign was not a mythic past, but an eternal present, a frequency that can be tuned into at any moment by any generation ready to hear it. Every stone, every artifact, every fragment of myth is a note in that forgotten symphony. And we, the modern heirs of dust and data, hold the instrument that can play it again: consciousness. The old world doesn't need to be rebuilt in stone or empire. It needs to be reawakened in awareness. To live as the ancients once did is not to mimic their rituals, but to remember their balance, to see the divine not above, but within. The flood, then, is not coming to destroy, but to cleanse, to wash away the residue of forgetfulness. The waters of change rise again, not as punishment, but as renewal. And though the world trembles with uncertainty, there is something profoundly hopeful in that. For every cycle begins with chaos and ends with light. Perhaps that is what the ancient kings of Sumer were trying to tell us, that even after the longest night, kingship will descend again, wisdom will return, memory will rise. But this time the kings are not of blood or crown. They are the awakened selves within us all. Each person who remembers, each heart that reconnects to the pulse of the earth, becomes part of that re-emerging order. The reign of the gods was never meant to be distant. It was meant to be collective, a harmony of consciousness spanning the planet, humming in unison once more. As we stand at this turning of ages, we face the same choice our ancestors did, to fall into fear or to rise into remembrance. The myths have given us the map. The stones have given us the coordinates. The earth has given us the warning. What remains is the will to listen, to see through the illusion of separation and hear the quiet music beneath it all. When we do, the floodwaters of the past will no longer haunt us. They will lift us. They will carry us, as they once carried the ark, toward a new dawn where memory and creation meet again. And maybe, when the next historians, thousands of years from now, uncover the traces of our age, they will not find ruins of hubris, but remnants of awakening. Maybe they will call this the time when the long forgetting ended. The reign of 240,000 years was never truly buried. It was only sleeping. And in the silence between worlds, you can almost feel it stirring again. The heartbeat of an ancient memory pulsing beneath our feet, reminding us that history is not over. It is beginning again. Keep an open mind. Keep listening. And never forget that what is lost can always be remembered.